Hey there, everybody. We are going to start off with 8.1 static class members. And this starts on page, it looks like 493. And here's the concept, and then we'll kind of talk about how this goes. The concept is that a static class member is something that belongs to the class. So the abstract thing that we're talking about, but not the individual objects instantiated from that class. And what I'll tell you is, at least to my satisfaction, the description here in the textbook is weird. So first, before we get there, let's just think about what it means to be a static method, or a static, here, let me get back to the text here, member of a class. So here we have, and I could not find a more appropriate drawing, so we're just going to have to deal with this. Let's say that we are creating a student class. So this is not an object, but this is the class from which every student object is going to be derived. And we've got just a couple of really lazy fields that are associated with that, right? So we have student ID, we have first name, we have last name, we have social security number, and we have school name. And we're accustomed to being able to do this, right? So then we would have a set student ID and a get student ID method. We would have a set first name and a get first name method. We would have a set and get for last name, SSN, and school name, and so on and so forth. And then what I start to do is I start to create student objects. So we create student object 1, we create student object 2, we create student object 3, we create student object 4. And that's all well and good, but a business doesn't always need for all of our class members to be changeable, right? So if we were going to do this for Rock Valley College, right, we would have new students, we could have student IDs, we could have first names, last names, etc., etc. But down here at school name, is there any real reason for school name to change? So is there any reason why students enrolled at Rock Valley College would have a school name that is other than Rock Valley College? Now, there's reasons why, look, you could get into an argument when you're developing the software here that says, why do we need a school name if you're not going to let us change it? Who knows, right? Maybe we connect to another system. They need that piece of data, so we have to provide that piece of data. And as long as they're paying us, we say, yes, that's a fantastic idea. Let's include school name, despite the fact that we're a school and we only have the one name. So school name is something that we do not want to have change, so that every time we instantiate another student object from our student class, student object 1, student object 2, student object 3, student object 4, they can have different student IDs, first names, last names, social security numbers, but they cannot have a different school name. So that's really the benefit here to having static class members, is you are enforcing essentially a business rule on your class. So there's not a lot of change here to what we would see. We would just have to mark those fields essentially as static when we go through and create them. So here's a code listing, and we'll actually see a static class member later on in one of the code samples, but just not right here. This is the only change that we would have to make. We would have a static integer for something, right? So we would declare private static string school name. We would assign that Rock Valley College. So we're actually going to see this in another example later on. This particular example with a static field suggests that, hey, look, I want, and I know you can read, but I'm just going to mention it here. I want to have a class called countable. And in that class, I have this private static ints int, so that's an integer, instance count. And we're going to leave that, we're going to rather initialize that at 0. So in essence, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, look, every time you create an object from this class countable, this particular static member doesn't necessarily belong to the object. It belongs to the class. So this way, every time we create, and that's right here, public countable. So this is our no argument constructor. Every time we create a new object of the countable class, I'm just going to instance count plus plus. So remember that instance count is this here, the static int that belongs to the class, but to none of these objects. And this way, I can actually keep track of how many objects I'm creating as I'm going along. So this one actually does not provide us with a working, here it goes, set of code. So here it goes. It does provide us with a working set of code. So here in what essentially amounts to my main or my driver, I create new objects from that countable class, 1, 2, 3 of them. Each time I create a new object from countable, remember all it's doing is it's adding once to that static member, which is the instance count. In this way, when I output the result of that, I say, or I would see rather, 3 instances of the class were created. That's an awfully long way around the block here in the text. I don't feel like you can see the example I started with is all the way down here, which is pages and pages in, and it just kind of, it's backwards for my liking. So you can, as part of a developer's concern, more of a business-facing concern, you can have fields that are not associated with any particular object, but are rather associated with a class instead. So instance count, like we saw here, is associated with the class, but not any one of these particular objects. Or in the example I provided, school name could be static and would not be associated necessarily with student 1, student 2, student object 3, or student object 4, but it would be something that they all would automatically be assigned.